Maya, what's your French connection here in Louisiana?
Well, my family's from Acadiana, so we do have some connection of French culture here in Louisiana, and it's perfect you bring that topic up because it ties into our initiative we'll be discussing today.
And what's that initiative?
There's a new cultural center opening up in the French Quarter at 602 Toulouse, and it's being opened by the New Orleans Foundation for Francophone Cultures, also known as Nous Foundation. It's going to be a beautiful space that's going to be multi-use that will include a bookstore, gallery space, and information center for all things Francophonie in Louisiana.
That's amazing. And who do we have speaking to us today about it?
The co-founder and director, Scott Tilton.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear what he has to say to us.
Tilton?
Missions by
Hey, Scott. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
So I want to kick it off with, why do you think now is the right time to open a cultural center dedicated to
Dedicated to weenies.
Why do you think right now is the time to start a cultural center dedicated to Louisiana's French history?
Yeah, I think that this is a history that goes back 300 years in the state. I think it's something that's really rooted in the identity of Louisiana, and it's an important part of our present. If you think back, though, one of the big issues that Louisiana has faced in terms of what we refer to as heritage cultures. So when we talk about that, we're oftentimes referring to Cajun, Creole, and Indigenous communities, is that they faced a lot of discrimination in the 20th century. So there was a banning of the languages from basically 1921 into 1974 as the primary language of education. And the reason why that was really devastating is it's not in education, obviously, it blocks transmission, but it also presaged its elimination in politics and commerce and all of the aspects that made it relevant in daily life. So we're now looking today, we went from about 1.5 million French and Creole speakers in 1970 to about 200,000 today, and that may be a generous number. So when we think about why to create a cultural institution today, it's because this is the best time to do it. We still have native speakers. We do have a whole generation of immersion school students who are coming up, and we want to be able to provide with them cultural outlets and just a whole experience that makes them want to connect to their cultures. And I think that that's something that's really important in Louisiana today. And I think another aspect that's important is, as we're seeing initiatives to make English the official national language, even though the United States has never had that before, it's a further threat to minority language cultures throughout the United States. So Louisiana, with our heritage communities, are important with French and Creole, but there are other communities around the United States. And I think our being able to advocate and make our cultures visible is also part of a larger effort nationally to make sure that other languages that are facing the similar forms of discrimination are able to come together and oppose this.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it seems like too, the dwindling numbers, I mean, it's shocking to hear, really. I mean, and especially a place where we are right now that's so rooted in French culture, so that's pretty crazy to hear.
I don't know I feel like having conversations with a lot of other Louisiana natives, it always breaks my heart when we talk about our grandparents or great-grandparents and not being able to speak French, like in school, and like being reprimanded. And it's just like that right there, kills it. Because as a kid, you're like, if your teacher tells you not to do something and your parents telling you like you're going to like not do it, and we lost all of these generations like being able to pour into us and keep that language alive.
That's exactly right. And I think that when we lose connection to our language, we lose connection to our history. And I think that's an important aspect. If you think about it, throughout the majority of Louisiana history, a plurality, or even at different times, the majority of the population spoke French and Creole. And that means that our literature, opera, architecture, cuisine, all of this was rooted into a language that only about 4% or less of our population can speak today. And if the majority of that population, a lot of these works are not translated. So as you think about it, as the more the generations pass with fewer and fewer speakers of the language, the less that we have connection to that history. And that's actually fairly unique. If you think about Anglophone parts of the United States, they'll never be divorced of their history that directly because they can at least go back into archives and find it. And I think that there's other aspects of Louisiana history that there is a desire to erase that, because Louisiana was incredibly important, for example, in the first civil rights movement in the 1860s and 70s, and all of that advocacy was done in French. And it's really a lot of it. And I think that that's important because the politics of today and even going back 100 years ago, resemble each other in the desire to erase certain narratives. It's just 100 years ago, those narratives were in French, and today we don't have that direct connection, so it's even easier to erase.
Yeah, and I think that's what I like resonate most with that because I come from like a mixed immigrant household, and I think it is you think like, oh, it's got to be on the parents to instill some of those values and teach that language, but it's just those parents have all these other things going on. There needs to be a framework outside of the home that allows you to like connect with the language and give you the framework and the structure to develop that language. So I think
The
that's really
community,
cool.
Yeah, the community.
The community.
The community is
thing,
so important.
Yeah.
I think that we thought about that when we were creating the Nous Foundation. It's visibility and capacity are the big issues. When the initiative that this came out of was my husband, Rudy Bazinet, and I, when we were living in Paris, launched and directed this initiative that helped Louisiana, that had Louisiana join what's called the International Organization of the Francophonie, which brings together about 90 different countries across the world, 1 billion people, 16% of the global economy. And I always joke that it's sort of like the French UN. It's like a bunch of different countries across the world that don't necessarily speak French as a primary language, but they come together to build economic ties and sort of reinforce the French language. And Louisiana's joining it was a huge kind of coup in the sense that we were able to recognize that we are a Francophone region of the United States. We became the first U.S. state to join an international organization in that regard. And then we also were able to start thinking about capacity, because that's as we've lost native speakers and we've lost institutions that serve those communities that spoke French, we've also lost capacity for just institutions that could work with it, schools, all of these different things that make what you were mentioning, the language relevant in everyday life. And so I think that what we were thinking about with the Nous Foundation is we can come in, create a cultural institution, and we can work across different domains. I can present the different projects that we work on, but it's the arts, it's culture, it's film, it's everything, because we want to make all of this culture relevant today in 2025.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess too, I'm curious, you mentioned having been in Paris and being a part of this organization, but what other avenues are you guys a part of? Like, what really set you guys up to make this stride? What made you the right person to take this initiative on? What were your past histories with the work that you've done to really help you and be the ones to really take on this mantle?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a deep root in my identity. And I think that I do always try to caveat that by saying that I think that anyone can work in heritage cultures in Louisiana. I don't think that there's anything essentialist about one's background or their ancestors or anything of that nature. It obviously creates an important tie that people would have into it. But I also think that this is a space, just like someone comes to the United States, it's not, we're not going to be that dogmatic about them having to be 10th generation Americans so that they can speak English. It's not, there's nothing reductive about that. But I do have I love my family's connection to the language. My family oftentimes identifies as French Creole, and that's an identity that goes back hundreds of years in Louisiana. And particularly my grand-mère's generation really held on to that. And my great uncle, Omer Dupuis, was really involved with the French language. And he was involved with the founding of Codophile, which is a state agency for French. It's the only state agency in the country that advocates for a language, which is really neat. That was back in 1968, and that's while they were kind of like trying to dig themselves out of the hole of language loss, and so they created Codophile. He was also the guide to Charles de Gaulle when he came to town.
Okay, big shoes.
And so and he helped bring the Joan of Arc statue to the city, which is funny. But it was just there was always simmering in my family this love of the French language, this understanding that Louisiana has deep ties to the French language, and that there's no contradiction in being American and speaking French. And so I think that coming out of that connection, it brought me my own sense of pride. And I wasn't fully bilingual growing up. I sort of slowly learned French, some through my family, but then a lot through education. But it did always have this sort of orientation towards the Francophone world. And so when I finished undergrad, I ended up going to Paris and doing my graduate studies at a school called Sciences Po. And that's what sort of got me involved into Francophone advocacy. So I think that there's a deep-rooted sense in Louisiana, in my family, And I think that I carry that with me. But I also think one of the responsibilities in that work is saying to people that a lot of people have lost connections through their own family over generations. And there's all sorts of confusion about identities, and people are kind of sheepish about reasserting those identities. And I think that I try to take that experience that I have and make it an expansive vision that everyone can be involved, everyone can come into the space. And then in that process of speaking with other people who are advocates for the language, they may discover something about their own family history or themselves.
That's awesome.
I love that aspect of it, of being able to maybe reconnect and learn more about your own family history, and also just learning, I think, re-educating people about Louisiana history and like reminding them of the roots of like Creole, Cajun, and all the what beautiful melding pot we are here.
That's exactly right. And, there's ways that you can orient Louisiana. We're unique in the United States in that we really are at this sort of crossroads of Carrefour. And you can say that we're part of the United States South, which we are, but you also can reorient us to be part of the Caribbean and part of the sort of Latin American sphere. And we are the sum of these influences, and not one is predominant. And I think that that's important to think about, that it's a region that's always changing. And I think heritage cultures are no different. We are evolving. Even though we may not have as many native speakers today as we used to have in the past, we still have this rich history and culture that we can rely on, but we also still have all of the agency in the world to define a future for ourselves. And I think that that's something that's important to the United States, because Louisiana went through this sort of difficult period where we discriminated heavily against these communities, although other communities in the United States also dealt with that. There are many, many communities. But we do have a lot of the resources here, and we luckily live in a built environment, particularly in New Orleans and South Louisiana, which is literally manifestation of our culture. You can't have the French Quarter without thinking about heritage cultures in Louisiana, because that is literally where they lived.
And let's keep it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So I'd like to talk more about the center specifically and learn like what was your vision for it, how did it all come about, and like what are your plans for it exactly?
Yeah, so this gets back to kind of the idea of the visibility and capacity. So we were always impressed. When I lived in Paris, I took notes because there's the Finnish Institute, and it is very Nordic, very chic, very fun. And what I loved about it though was
Cold.
it was not a million people learning Finnish on a given day in Paris, as one can imagine.
Man,
But they
that'd be
created
wild.
that would be wild. I mean, maybe kind of a few hipsters here and there, but but they created such an attractive space, and it was so well done that everyone went there. Like, if particularly students would study there after school. It was, really a cool spot. And we wanted to do the same thing because in Louisiana, we do have a lot of speakers still. We have a lot of children in immersion schools now. And we wanted to create a space where it would be very welcoming and also just sort of a hub. Our goal is really to have this sort of Francophone hub in North America that New Orleans and South Louisiana can turn back into. And the idea is just sort of creating bilingual economy, all these different opportunities that could really help Louisiana diversify both its cultural offerings and its economic offerings, since we are in a state that's dealt with a lot of sort of feeling of stagnation around its economy and a lot of young people moving away. So we think that culture is a very important way to be able to do that. It's a way to have people change their perspective. It's a way for them to re-anchor themselves to the community. And that cultural center that we're thinking about, we want it to be kind of take inspiration from Louisiana's heritage cultures and aesthetics. That's what we're working on right now as we renovate out 602 Toulouse. But we also want it to be very modern. We want, we're not going to do, for our album, for example, in our film recently, we put hot pink on there because we want people just, when you think about heritage cultures in Louisiana, it can be hot pink. There's nothing,
There's no rules behind
there's no
what
rules.
colors
It doesn't
you
need to
pick,
be,
you know?
there doesn't need to be an alligator there.
It doesn't have to be red,
Unless
white,
we
and
want
blue.
it there.
Yeah.
We can work on that. We can play with the aesthetic. We can, build on the past, but build something new. And that new space that we're creating, all the puns intended, is a way for us to work on that.
But what I really resonate with and what you're saying is, I think, and what it sounds like you're already moving towards, is that with any space in New Orleans, I think what really attracts people, especially here, but as you're saying in Paris, I guess too, but is when there is a space that feels in a city that there just hasn't been a lot of investment towards really nice, beautiful things. When those things do come around, I think people really value it, and I think want to be a part of that.
Yeah, and New Orleans loves culture. I think that's what's so, we're very fortunate to live in a city that even if we don't always think that there's the right amount of investment into culture, the
Mhm.
culture is always there, and there is so much that people are willing to support. And I think we are so lucky for that.
Yeah.
But I also think that, in my opinion, we can chase Atlanta, we can chase Houston, we can for the economic side of things and try to become a tech hub. But in my opinion, Louisiana's heritage cultures are a real draw. And I think that there's a way to sustainably invest in that. And I think that in the past, where we've really messed up is that we viewed culture as a finite resource, and there was a lot of exploitation of that, just like we did with the coast, just like we did with other parts of our aspects of Louisiana that have made the livability of the state somewhat difficult. But we can change that model. And I've always been inspired by the Bilbao effect, and that's where they built the Guggenheim in a Spanish industrial city.
Okay.
And the building of the Guggenheim there in a city that was kind of just declining industrially for decades, just totally reanimated it, turned the city back into a cultural hub in Europe, and they reinvested into it. And it's changed the fortunes of Bilbao. And I think in New Orleans, we can do the same thing. It only takes 2 or 3 world-class cultural institutions. You reinvest in them. And I think that heritage cultures are primed for that. I think that there's a need for reinvestment, for sustainable, to sustainably reinvest in our cultures, because we've been exploited for so long that we've declined quite significantly. But in our cultural work, for example, we've done a lot of film. We punch above our weight in terms of cultural production, because we did film. We've done about 6 films, some documentary, some narrative. We got invited to the Cannes Film Festival last year to present these films.
Big dogs.
Yeah, for Film USA, because there's this authenticity around Francophone voices from Louisiana that we could do another Hollywood production, and that's good. It employs people. It's an important industry here in Louisiana. But in terms of domestic, just within Louisiana, trying to invest on another aspect of the film industry, for example, you can also do heritage languages, and then it gets picked up, and it helps. It sort of has this virtuous circle element to it, because then it attracts more film, for example.
Yeah.
Same with exhibitions and work that we've done on that side.
It's like you get that foreign feel, but on home soil.
Exactly. And the nice thing, it's an authentic voice from the United States, you know, and I think that that's what's fun too, is I think it's a novelty for Americans to hear people speaking French in the.
I was going to say, I'm going to project here, but I'm assuming that French people and other French speakers around the world are interested of like, what is U.S. French? What is it like to be from, Louisiana, from New Orleans, from this area, and be speaking French, and this language mean as much to you as it does to me?
That's exactly right. And what's funny is it's interesting how the perception of French in Louisiana it's been almost slower to change than the reality of who's speaking it on the ground. And the perception in France and Quebec, maybe because they watch way too many documentaries on Louisiana, that like show at on these things at like 12 a.m., but they have this perception that we all speak French. And which is funny. They come here sometimes and like that we're not able to serve that, we're not able to like provide that, which is why it makes it even more important to have institutions that are visible in the French Quarter, for example, that like here's the context, because they're walking and thinking on Bourbon Street they're going to be served in French. You're like, that ain't happening. But
that's impressive.
The positive side of that is that people still perceive us as part of the Francophone world. And in that way, we're able to still have this sort of gravitas. We're able to still be able to produce film, exhibition work, whatever it is, and still seem very authentic in those spaces. And that's critical. I think that we really should be working with the young generation in Louisiana, particularly these students coming out of immersion schools. And that's a lot of the programs that we've been launching at New. We have a program called Le Lab, and it's sort of it's somewhere between an accelerator and an incubator, but it's for cultural keepers in Louisiana, often young people who are kind of cultural entrepreneurs. And we work with them to create their own businesses, their own nonprofits, not with the idea that they're going to change and work 100% in French or Louisiana Creole, but with the idea that they can at least integrate that into their business model, and then it becomes a bilingual business, because we know that we're not changing Entergy tomorrow. We would love to, but we know the Fortune 500s aren't going to change.
You got to sneak your way in there, put a little French in their cup, every day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, it'll probably make the coffee better.
You didn't hear it here, but I didn't say anything. I guess, to kind of dive in a little deeper on the center that you're working towards, as far as the process has gone, have you noticed have there been any pivots or things you've gotten feedback on, things that you're changing, things that you've learned? Like, has there been any of that going on?
Yeah, I joke, this is a line adopted from my mom, but I've always loved, but she said, do not underestimate the extent of my resolve in this matter. So we launched our project during COVID, which was quite intriguing. We were not planning on that. There was this whole ride where we got stuck with my husband's visa. So we had to go through a third-party country, which ended up being Dubai at the time because it was one of 2 countries open in the world.
Wow.
So we had to go across the Swiss border, get to Dubai, come to America to start our project. So in terms of just resolve behind it and wanting to be here and work on that, I think that there's no doubt. But it also taught us very early on in the project, we got to adapt because sometimes life will send you on a plane to Dubai. And I think you gotta.
Hey, you saw the Burj Khalifa. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was interesting. Those
was tall.
those Bellagio fountains in front.
Wow, really?
Who knew? But it was really, in terms of coming, we've had some some lucky breaks, and we are so recognizing of that because we had the historic BK House and Gardens that picked us up, which is a beautiful museum in the French Quarter, and it's a house museum and it has a lot of history with immigrants from Saint-Domingue and all this stuff. It has a really interesting tie into some of the cultural work that we're doing because as a physical home, but they pulled us in, they offered us office. We were able to do a lot of our programming out of their house. And that really gave us a leg up because that allowed us to kind of take the training wheels off, start working on larger and more ambitious programming. We did a huge exhibit there called Haiti, Louisiana, Tides of Freedom, which ended up going to the United Nations. So we were able to really do some neat work there. And then we're going to maintain that presence there. But we also just created a collaboration with the historic New Orleans collection. And that's why we're going to have this new space on Toulouse Street.
I love the historic New Orleans collection.
Yeah, they're awesome. Yeah. So they're fantastic. And they're bringing us on board and kind of helping incubate us. And we're going to be renting this space, which is part of their campus. So 602 Toulouse, the new space, will be our showroom. And that's where we're going to do some small exhibitions. There's going to be an information center about heritage culture since there's tens of millions of visitors that come through the French Quarter. And then we'll also have a bookstore in there in some of our offices. So that's going to be a really neat opportunity for us to be there. But we've kind of pivoted over the years because we've sort of chased opportunities that were given to us in some cases. And we've just really ran with those opportunities. And then that's kind of built up to one thing to another so that we could create collaborations with organizations. So then we could kind of work on our own structure. And that's maybe where the big pivot is that we realized that we needed to create partnerships early on because with the pandemic in particular, we couldn't have done it on our own.
You can have one of those LED tables that's interactive.
Yeah, we are actually.
What? Yeah! All right, that's pretty cool.
That's good that you mentioned that.
Who told you?
I love a good interactive LED table. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that's exactly right.
All right. Okay, well, I'm there.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. That's funny.
I love that. That's all that.
Wait, listen, when you said
yeah.
historic New Orleans collection, I was like, I wonder.
No, we walked into that Welcome Center too, and we were like, I want one of those.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So how else can people support you? Tell us about the opening. How can we get involved?
Yeah, on May 7th, we're opening, and that's going to be really a wonderful experience. We're going to have a gala, so that's kind of my executive director development hat. Come join us. It's going to be at the Historic New Orleans Collection.
What's the attire?
It's business, I guess, but kind of business casual. We're not too stuffy.
Okay.
We'll have Belgian waffles. We're gonna have desserts by Brennan's and all sorts of good catering and champagne. So there you go.
I went to last year's gala. The galas are a good time. So yes.
So it'll be a fun evening. We're gonna open our music exhibit. That's been our big project as of late. We worked on a beautiful project with the Library of Congress to document Louisiana music as performed in 2025, like French and Creole music. So we recorded an album at Esplanade Studios. And with the musicians on the album are Louis Michaud, Sunpie and the Louisiana Sunspots, Layla McCalla, the Baby Dolls, Les Sinel, which is a chamber orchestra group, and Sweet Crude. So we recorded an album with them, and we did a documentary. We've done a publication, and now the exhibit's going to be opening. And it's going to be very interactive. It's going to be a really cool experience. So that's our first renovation of the space is for the exhibit. And then we're going to come back during the summer and reopen it and do more permanent renovations and open it in September.
Cool.
And the exhibit is May 7th until
June 30th.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll have about a month and a half with it, and it'll be nice because we can kind of cut our teeth on hosting a larger exhibit on our own, and it's going to be great. That's a really interactive one because people can listen to the album. We'll have the vinyl available. It's going to be. I'm excited for that one. We've kind of figured out a way to. We have like a blank canvas with the whole space, which looks a lot like a gallery, just to install an entire exhibit.
Wow.
I like the idea of starting with that one also just because it's multimedia of like it's a documentary, it's the music itself, and then like I'm assuming there's like, you know, photography and other things to accompany all of that project. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Culture.
Exactly. And what's fun too is, you know, we joked about that regrettably with the discrimination in heritage cultures throughout decades and centuries. There's a lot of division internally within communities and a lot of people infighting about identities. And my joke about that sometimes it's like in the South at some point we should stop telling people what they are, you know, and just let people identify themselves. You know, I think at some point that's like
they're doing that.
Yeah, I know. I think that's mission critical at sometimes. Like there's all these debates online about Creole and Cajun and this, that, and the other. And I'm sitting there going like, if someone identifies such way, it's probably because their family told them. If their family told them, it's because it's coming through their family.
Yeah.
Like there's some reason and it's very important. Yeah. And in our work, sort of our desire is always to bridge the gap, whether it's geographic, whether it's among identities, just bridging and building communities. And so we like the idea of doing a major work on music. And just to give an idea, this was not in New Orleans, but it just showed us how music can really bring people together. Yeah. We did an concert to unveil the album at the Library of Congress a few weeks ago, and they had to put us in a bigger auditorium. And then it was with Louis and Layla, and they sold it out. And it was just the amount of just good feelings in that space were really spectacular. And I think it just put Louisiana's cultural, foot forward. And I think we're excited for that opportunity in Louisiana with this exhibit because it's just everyone knows these musicians. They're wonderful. They're from different aspects of Louisiana. You know, some are in Mardi Gras tradition. Some are Lost Bayou Ramblers. You know, it's all these different traditions that are coming together. But it's the four corners of the state united behind this album.
That's awesome. Wow. And I'm not sure if we got this. Did we get your socials and where people can find you?
Yes. So they can find us at Nous Foundation. So Nous Foundation. Our website is new-foundation.org. We're very active on Instagram. So, come find us there. We really do a good job keeping that up to date. And I think that it's cool because I think it shows sort of what we're trying to do in terms of the aesthetic.
Yeah. Great. Well, perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining us. But before you leave, we have to have our little special question.
We have a hot seat question.
Ooh, I love it.
So, question for you, for all of us. Who is your favorite historical French figure?
Ooh.
Oh, man. Someone else go first.
All right, what you got?
You go first.
Wait, you want me to go first?
Oh, yeah, I want you to go first.
All right. Who would I say? I would say, to me, the best French figure I like is... I had him in my head.
Okay, I got one. I can go.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go with, there's probably a better one, but this comes off the top of my head, Jean Lafitte.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one.
Grew up on the West Bank, went to school near Lafitte, so it's just like...
Battle in New Orleans.
Yeah, and when you're younger and you're an angsty teenager, you affiliate with pirates, you're like, they're onto something.
I'm going to cheat and give you two.
Oh.
Okay, yeah.
I love Catherine Deneuve. She is the French actress. She's in like Huit Femmes and all of these different.
Okay.
She's just like classy incarnate, that kind of like French je ne sais quoi. She brings that to life, and I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Locally, I've always loved. There's an advocate. He helped bring together Les Sennel, which is like an anthology of poetry. It's the first anthology of poetry by Black Americans, and it was called Les Sennel. The Holly Berries is kind of it's some specific berry, but it's beautiful work, and it's from the 1840s, and it's advocating for civil rights. And he brought that together. He created a whole school and all of his stuff. His name was Armand Lanus, and he's, I think, someone who's overlooked in Louisiana history. And it's so much beautiful writing, and very few of his works have been translated, which I think that that should be rectified.
Wow.
But Armand Lanus was I've always gravitated towards him because I did some research when I was at university, and I was like, why don't I know about this?
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
like it was the first time I really heard about Les Sennel. It was the first time I heard about this whole like almost salon culture in New Orleans at the time, but for people advocating for like civil rights. And it's really cool.
That's a
That's
good
all,
one.
well, that's
Yeah.
gonna be better
Thank
than
you for sharing that
what
one.
I would come up with. Well, which makes sense. I would hope that you would be different categories. I mean, as I thought about it, I was like, I could come up with some crazy answer or something really that showcases my deep knowledge of France. But then I just thought, well, the person I probably know the best and who I've like really, just saw a lot into is the easy answer, which is Napoleon, which is, I think what I like about his life that's so interesting is that it's like that he is the ultimate Icarus story, where he really did get too close to the sun and just could. There's so many moments where in his life where he was just like, is now enough? Like, you could just stop now. You can like take a break. And he's like, nah, I'm gonna keep going. Keep on trucking. Keep on trucking. Go right into that Russia. And it's just like, I think that to see that end in tragedy is just a good example of the human condition, and like kind of what we're dealing with now is like humans just don't know when to stop. And I think, he was just a great example of that. So I think that's what's interesting about it.
Yeah, don't fight a land war in Asia.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We all learned that lesson.
Yeah.
Eurasia.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny how that. Yeah, no, he has an interesting one. Except that film, not the best
that
portrayal.
best comedy I've ever seen. They got boats. What was it? That one? I love that. Man, oh God, he was the best part of that. I enjoyed that quite a lot.
Yes.
Wasn't accurate historically, but
Lots of artistic freedom there.
Yeah. Ridley Scott does that a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank y'all for the invitation.
Yeah, of course.
Looking forward to the opening of this culture center.
See y'all on May 7th.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Missions Bayou, powered by Comfy Stone. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the podcast wherever you listen. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment, letting us know your thoughts and who you'd like to hear from next. We'll see y'all next time.